Now we look at how he combines freedom, morality and autonomy together. So for Kant, the goal of human actions is the attainment or realization of maximum freedom or autonomy. So all our life individual want to maximize his freedom, maximize his autonomy. That means freedom from the external interference and control by others. However, such freedom or autonomy for the individual is possible by following the moral laws that they themselves legislate. Thus, they are free from external control and interference, and in the groundwork, Kant described the notion of free will and relate it to the idea of autonomy, rationality and morality. He writes, freedom will be identical with autonomy, and since autonomy is the principle of morality, a free will would be a will under moral laws. So the free will is not free from all kind of restraints. It must be subjected to a set of moral laws which individuals themselves legislate by using their own free will and autonomy. So for Kant, freedom is a necessary presupposition of all activities as well as all forms of thinking. So you cannot have enlightenment unless individuals are free to think or free to choose a particular course of action. So a rational agent must regard himself or herself as capable of thinking on his own rational principles, and only so can she regard his her will as his her own. So most of us really live our life by following the norms and the values set by others. Kant was envisaging a society or a community where individuals will think for themselves as a free autonomous subject, and while doing so they will subject themselves to a set of moral laws which they themselves legislate, and not the society, not the community and not any other body. So this free will is good in itself without further qualifications. So once you have that goodwill, you develop that goodwill using your sense of obligation, duty by following categorical imperative or using the reason, that would be good in itself. It does not require the consequences or the outcome of your actions. So this will is conceived as a power of determining oneself to act in accordance with the idea of certain moral and ethical laws. And emphasizing upon rationality, Kant maintains that only a rational being has the power to act in accordance with his idea of laws, that is in accordance with the principles, and only so has he a will. So having a will requires individual to act according to one's own thinking and considering himself as free from any kind of external control and interference. So free will starts with the thinking first, as free from any kind of subjugation by the society or by other external authority. So then Kant explains that freedom and autonomy can be realized only in the kingdom of ends, which we will discuss in the next class. And in this kingdom of ends, we treat our own person and others as an end in themselves and not as a means for our further ends. So a will operating on the principle would be free from any ground determination in nature and hence truly free. A moral subject is thus autonomous in a radical sense. He obeys the dictates of his own free will using his own reason. So there is a kind of very sophisticated argument in Kant by combining both the freedom and autonomy by subjecting the both to the moral codes or a sense of moral duty and obligation in the human being using his idea of categorical imperative. So the categorical imperative, Kant suggests, gives subjective reality to human freedom. So this really does not give the individual a moral code. Using it, individual can themselves decide for what they should do in a particular given circumstances or in the practical life. It instructs us as how we ought to act to confirm our autonomy. So, the laws or the sense of moral duty and obligation is given to us not by any other body, but by ourselves, by using our own reason and rational faculty and subjecting it to the moral code and obligation that we decide for themselves. So, there is a kind of, you are free and autonomous, and yet that freedom and autonomy is realized by following certain moral codes which you yourself have legislated. So, no matter what the actual circumstances of man are, he ought to act in a manner that reflects his own dignity and worth as a moral and rational being. So, as an end in himself, man is only bound by those laws which he himself enacts, and this has the wider acceptance also. So, in modern democracy, you see we govern by laws and legislation. And what is the basis of that laws and legislation? That is, it is formulated by the representative which we ourselves have elected. So, for instance, in the parliament, laws are formulated or policies are formulated. The other organs of the state such as executive or the judiciary help us in the implementation or correct implementation of those laws and policies that is formulated by the parliament. And the parliament is the will of the people, and therefore the laws and legislation enacted by the parliament has the legitimacy, reflects the will of the people, and we must subject ourselves to those laws and legislation. However, here in Kantian ethics, it is not a kind of representative or a kind of delegation of this legislation. Categorical imperative does not envisage such a representation and delegation of legislative activity. It is like all individual as a free autonomous subject who are rational must legislate for himself what is good and what code of actions they should follow in their practical life. So, for Kant, rationality involves thinking in universal terms while acting in a particular context and thinking consistently. Hence, the maxim underlying any proposed action must be such that we can universalize without contradiction. So, CI is the source of moral action for the man with a good will, that is, as a rational agent, he guides his practical life by an absolute and compulsorily binding sense of duty or obligation, and in doing so an individual in his or her particular context simultaneously act as a member of the universal community, and that is the kind of paradox which Kant transcends. So, you are acting in a particular context, but acting in a manner which you want to be universal. That means you want other men to follow in the similar context, and thereby they make themselves known to the intelligible world. So, there is a kind of transcendental notion of freedom in Kant's philosophy, and he argued that before acting upon our free autonomous good or moral will, we must intuitively think ourselves as free. So, this intuitive thinking of being free from any external restraints and controls is necessary for individual to act in an enlightened manner, to subject themselves and their actions to a particular set of codes or moral codes or a sense of duty and obligation, and this they must perform towards themselves and also towards others in the society. So, first requirement is you must intuitively think yourself as free from any external restraints and controls. So, categorical imperative is the basis of all forms of social and moral living according to Kant, and it is the basis of organizing individual and collective lives on the rational laws and free will of the individual. So, the moral sense of duty in Kant is equal to legality, that is, it is compulsory, it is binding on the individual like laws, and categorical imperative command absolute obedience which is independent of an individual's empirical context. So, it helps them to distinguish his free, reason governed, autonomous nature from the unfree and passive nature of the animal. Thus, there appears to be a kind of paradox in Kantian notion of freedom. On the one hand, he argues about the empirical or the practical context of human being, which is bound by the laws of causality. However, as a moral being, he imagines him or her to transcend those contexts and act as a universal being guided by categorical imperative based on reason. So, there is a kind of transcendental logic or sense of ethics and morality here. Hence, it is argued that Kant's conception of freedom and autonomy is more like Rousseau's idea of general will as the source of human freedom. So, he is taking a lot of inspiration from Rousseau's conception of general will, and the idea of self legislation, and the basis of legitimacy is the based on the direct and the active participation of its citizen in making the laws. So, similar to Rousseau's ideas on freedom, Kant argued that human beings could realize his true worth by following their self-legislated moral laws, that is based on categorical imperative. So, that is all in this lecture today.